Welcome, viewers, to Bodhi Unified Flow. Here we simplify complexity and amplify performance. We are so thrilled to have you here today. In this explainer, we're diving into something absolutely fascinating, the foundations of behavioral change, specifically focusing on the science of generosity, or what early traditions called dana. We're going to look at part 1, the altruistic brain, and exactly how practicing dana literally reduces the stress hormone cortisol. It's this brilliant, perfect collision between ancient philosophical wisdom and cutting-edge modern neuroscience.
Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the power of dana, unpack the altruistic brain theory, figure out how to deactivate the stress response, look at the link between cortisol and our caregiving systems, summarize our learning objectives, and wrap up with our cited references. Let's jump right in.
By the end of this explainer, you're going to understand the precise neurobiological mechanics of how generosity optimizes not just your mental performance, but your physical health. We're going to map out Donald W. Plaft's 5-step altruistic brain theory. We'll deconstruct your physiological stress response, specifically the HPA axis, and discover how your body's caregiving system model uses oxytocin as a literal shield against stress. Okay, let's get into it.
Section 1. The power of dana.
So, what is dana? Well, it's a concept deeply rooted in early contemplative traditions. But today, modern behavioral science is basically translating it into a highly effective clinical intervention. It means generosity, sure, but it is way more than just a moral virtue or, writing a check to charity. It's a foundational behavioral framework. It covers a whole spectrum of giving. Yes, it's material resource allocation, but it's also temporal presence, like giving someone your absolute, undivided, non-judgmental attention. And crucially, it includes self-compassion, like having patience with yourself during a setback. Dana is this active, open-hearted practice that actively stabilizes you psychologically. It's basically a behavioral tool that builds up your resilience against life's crazy, unpredictable challenges.
There's this classic quote from Norman Maccowen, "We make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give." It beautifully captures the emotional anchor of giving, right? But what's wild is that modern affective neuroscience is now rigorously proving this to be biologically true. Evolutionary psychology shows us that in a world that often feels super hyper-competitive, our brains are actually wired to feel a greater sense of reward for magnanimity and selflessness than for selfishness. Giving literally gets under your skin. It shapes your physiological destiny.
Section 2, the altruistic brain theory. To understand how this works physically, we've got to look at the anatomical map provided by Donald W. Plaft. His altruistic brain theory, or ABT, completely shifts how we view human nature. His neurobiological research proves that altruism isn't just some learned cultural rule or a societal construct that we just kind of slap on top of a selfish brain. Absolutely not. The mechanisms for altruism are physically built right into our neural architecture. There is a default 5-step, totally unconscious process that our brain executes in fractions of a second to compel us to help others. Let's break down those 5 steps.
Okay, so imagine you see someone drop their groceries. Here is what your brain does. Step 1, representing the action. Before you even twitch a muscle, your brain generates a duplicate motor signal. It's called a corollary discharge of the potential helpful act. It's unconsciously predicting what's about to happen. Then step 2, representing the target. Your visual cortex gives you a detailed rendering of the person in need. And then comes step 3, which is just mind-blowing, merging target and self. Thanks to the magic of mirror neurons and cross-excitation, your brain temporarily dissolves the boundary between you and that other person. The neural image of them literally merges with your own self-representation. It's like you become them for a split second.
Now, these merged signals from steps 1 and 3 travel straight to the prefrontal cortex. This part of the brain is massive and highly developed in us humans. And here, it acts as a crucial ethical switch. This is exactly where the moral significance of your potential action is evaluated. And because the image of that person dropping their groceries has been merged with the image of yourself, your brain automatically envisions the consequences of helping as if it were happening to you. Which brings us to step 4, evaluating emotional significance. Because of that self-other merger in the prefrontal cortex, the brain very easily resolves any tension between self-interest and prosociality. It slaps a big good or do this value on the helpful act. And finally, step 5, executing the decision. Your insular cortex, working with your basic motor control mechanisms, translates that ethical decision into rapid physical motor output. You reach out, you help pick up the bags, you catch the person. All of this happens instantaneously, totally unconsciously. It proves we are literally biologically rigged to help.
Section 3, deactivating the stress response.
Now, to fully grasp the massive health benefits of generosity, we really need to understand how stress damages us in the first place, specifically through the HPA axis. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis is your body's primary built-in alarm system. When you perceive a threat, whether that's a physical danger or a psychological one, like social isolation, the hypothalamus releases corticotropin-releasing hormone. That eventually tells your adrenal glands to flood your whole system with cortisol. Cortisol mobilizes energy to help you fight or flee, which is great in an emergency. But prolonged exposure to the stress response, it creates a massive metabolic challenge. We're talking systemic wear and tear, hypertension, and serious immune dysfunction.
And here is where the science gets truly fascinating. The behavioral choices we make directly dictate this HPA axis activity. Studies actually show that when we act with stinginess or selfishness, especially when we had the perfect opportunity to help someone, we violate deeply ingrained social expectations of cooperation. This triggers a threat to our social self, inducing feelings of shame, which lights up the amygdala and spikes our cortisol levels. On the flip side, the practice of dana, of real generosity, activates the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, or VMPFC. This region signals safety to the brain, and that safety signal literally inhibits the threat response, triggering a release of oxytocin. So by giving, you are actively turning off your body's alarm system, resulting in a significantly blunted cortisol response. It's incredible.
The physical proof for this is undeniable. Take a landmark study by researchers Inagaki and Eisenberger. They put participants through a standardized, highly stressful laboratory test. But here's the catch. One group was asked to write a supportive note to a friend in need right before the stressor, while the control group just wrote about their mundane morning commute. The group that actively gave support showed a significantly reduced sympathetic nervous system response. Their systolic blood pressure was notably lower during the acute stressor compared to the people who just wrote about their commute. Actively giving support literally quieted down their cardiovascular stress reactivity.
Section 4. Cortisol and Caregiving Systems.
Let's zoom in even closer to the intracellular level with the caregiving system model developed by Stephanie Brown. When you engage in helping behavior, you fire up a dedicated neural caregiving network in your brain, involving areas like the septal area and ventral striatum. This highly prosocial state triggers a massive release of oxytocin right within the hypothalamus. Now pay close attention to this because it's wild. At the cellular level, this oxytocin interacts with the exact neurons trying to trigger your stress response. It physically hyperpolarizes the CRH neurons. In simple terms, oxytocin acts as a literal synaptic brake on your stress axis. By halting those neurons, it completely stops the downstream release of ACTH, which means the adrenal glands stop releasing cortisol. By helping others, you are biochemically shielding your own body from the toxic ravages of stress.
Now, it is important to know that while this system is built into all of us, it does get modulated by our individual differences. We don't all process acute stress exactly the same way. For instance, people with high trait empathy actually react to acute stress by increasing their generous behavior. They essentially use altruism as a coping mechanism. But those with low empathy, they tend to get more selfish when stressed. Biological sex also plays a really interesting role here. Females are heavily driven by the tend-in-befriend response, where stress induces that oxytocin release, prompting them to seek and give social support. Male responses tend to be a bit more variable, heavily influenced by testosterone levels, where stress might trigger more of a classic fight-or-flight response, though many males absolutely still utilize prosociality to cope with stress as well. Knowing these traits just helps us better navigate our own unique stress responses.
Section 5. Summary of Learning Objectives.
All right, let's pull all of this together and look at what we've achieved today. We completely deconstructed dana, moving it from an abstract moral concept to a clinically proven behavioral intervention that creates real psychological stability. We mapped out Donald Paff's 5-step altruistic brain theory, showing how our hardwired neural architecture, specifically that prefrontal cortex, literally merges the self with others to execute spontaneous prosocial acts. We demonstrated how selfishness triggers shame and spikes our HPA axis, whereas giving activates safety signals that calm us right down. And finally, we dove into the intracellular mechanics to prove that the oxytocin released from caregiving actually downregulates cortisol, protecting our physical health.
But before we wrap up, here's the absolutely critical takeaway you need to remember. That neurochemical helper's high, that amazing rush of oxytocin and dopamine you get when you help someone, is biologically transient. The physical clearance of oxytocin from your system happens pretty quickly, and those mood elevations will dissipate. This means that a one-off act of kindness, while great, isn't enough to permanently optimize your health. It requires a sustained habitual practice. So I want to leave you with this question to really think about.
How will you structure your daily habits to make Dharna a sustained, integrated practice for lifelong resilience? How are you going to offer your presence, your resources, and your compassion every single day to continuously keep that stress axis perfectly regulated?
Thank you so much for joining us today for this explainer. At Bodhi Unified Flow, our goal is to empower you with the science of human optimization. Here are the rigorous scientific studies, research papers, and foundational texts we referenced today, from the altruistic brain theory to the absolute latest findings in psychoneuroendocrinology. We highly encourage you to explore these sources to deepen your understanding. Until next time, remember that your biology actively rewards your generosity. Keep learning, keep optimizing, and most importantly, keep giving.